Okay, well, Greg has said we could record this because I know it's the first time we tried a member meeting by Zoom, and I know that there's some are going to want to watch it. I first saw Greg's work at Cultivate 712. I went in there one day, and there's these huge, wonderful pieces of with bugs in them, and calligraphy in the background. It was so fascinating, and so he's just a wonderful artist at what he does with that, and he's going to talk to us about that. I'll let him tell you about himself and everything, and I'll just turn it over to Greg now and get started. He will have a session at the end for questions if you want to ask him, so we can unmute everybody then at that time.
Okay, I have accident. Oh, you're unmuted. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Greg, take it away.
Okay, all right. Everybody can see me okay, I guess, and everybody can hear me, I hope. Okay, well, my name is Greg Lewallen. I was born and raised here in Waco, and Charles and I were just talking before the meeting a little bit that he and I both went to Baylor, here at Baylor, and he has taught here some, and I'm teaching here now. We missed each other by about 10 years, but my journey to where I'm at now began probably like yours did, unexpectedly maybe, but I was known as the kid that could draw in first grade. I remember I spent most of my first grade year in the cloakroom, which is where you got in trouble. If you got in trouble, that's where you got sent. There was a desk in the little closet where we all hung our coats and put our lunch boxes. And so I observed the rest of the class most of the time from that desk. But I like to draw, and it wasn't long before I was doing drawings for other students for projects and classes I never even took. I made A's in classes in schools I never even went to. Drawing things for my wife when she was in high school. We dated all through high school and stuff, and for other people that I knew. But I've always drawn. It's been something I've always known or thought that I enjoyed. And I've always collected bugs. I've started my bug collection officially when I was 5 years old. My mom was just an outdoor gal, grew up as an old country gal on the farm, and she loved to be outdoors, and we would go camping as a kid and stuff. And so I started showing interest in the natural world myself. And I have one small frame of beetles that I collected in 1962. And I still have those. And I haven't drawn them yet for any of my artwork, but I'm going to. I've kind of started with some of the more recent specimens acquisitions, and I'm working my way back through the collection as I go. Part of my deal that I do with my insect specimens, they are my bugs. I caught them myself. And that is that's my self-imposed restriction. I don't draw. There's all kinds of beautiful bugs out there, but if I didn't catch it myself, I'm not going to draw it because I don't have the story that goes with it. And so the writing that Charles alluded to, I've never heard it called calligraphic, but calligraphy. But anyhow, I call it more hen scratch than anything. But the writing is the story of the bug. That I associate with that bug. My insect collection. Leah, would you hand me one of those drawers? One of those things. I'll just show them what I've got. I don't know how many of these I've got. This is just one case, and I don't know. I'll get the reflective glass out of the way here, maybe. This is mostly moths. There's some beetles up here, but this is some of the bugs in my collection, and each one of these is like a photograph to me, just like in your old family photo album. You know, you see a picture of your maybe your birthday party when you turned 11 or something, and crazy cousin Eddie got on the mini bike and drove it through the barbed wire fence in the back pasture, or something like that. You know, those crazy stories that we have, and you associate when you see that photograph. Well, these bugs are just like that to me. I can transport myself back to the jungle of Venezuela, the first time I ever stepped into the jungle, and those same. Excuse me. those same emotions, see how easily it's invoked in me. Those same emotions, those same feelings. I can smell the rainforest. I can hear the birds that I still don't know what they are because I haven't been able to identify them. I never saw them. They're up in the canopy. But the scent, the sounds, the visuals of the huge, massive trees with buttress roots and coming way up to support this massive canopy up above. And just all of those things, the sights and sounds, I go back there in my mind when I look at these bugs. I collect here locally in the United States, but most of these are from the tropics, either Central South America and some in Africa. Get those out of the way. But I've had people ask me, well, how many different bugs do you have? And I have no idea. My brother and I we grew up together collecting insects all up through junior high, and then in about my junior high year, he was 3 years older than I was. We started we felt like we had advanced. We started collecting reptiles and amphibians. And so we started accumulating a snake and turtle and lizard and frog and salamander collection. And you can't put them in boxes like the butterflies. Those are just dried insects. But the reptiles and things, amphibians, you have to preserve. My father happened to work at the cement plant here in Waco, Universal Atlas Cement Plant. And they had a chemical lab, where they tested product and stuff. And he would get the chemist in the lab to order carbon tetrachloride and formaldehyde in 1 gallon jugs. And he'd bring it home and say, oh, I got your formalin, buddy. Here's your carbon tech. And we would mix it up, and we would inject all of our specimens with that and then put them in jars of denatured alcohol. We learned all of that by working at the Strecker Museum that was here at Baylor. Charles, you probably remember that. It was in the basement of Sid Richardson's Science Building. And it was kind of a combination cultural, natural history museum of the Central Texas area. But they had a collection of live reptiles and amphibians. And my brother and I, as junior curators, would come in on the weekends on Saturday morning. And it was a blast getting to do this. We'd come in and play with the 16-foot long Burmese python and the 10-foot long boa constrictor, and we'd feed all the lizards and the turtles and clean out the cages and stuff. And our reward for doing that was we got to go on collecting trips in the field with the biology graduate students. So here I'm a junior high kid tagging along with all these grad students, and I'm learning scientific methodology, record keeping, how to preserve the stuff once we catch them. And my brother and I, in just a matter of about 4 years, accumulated a massive collection of preserved reptiles and amphibians, as well as our insects. But we kind of left insects behind. And then we ended up donating that collection to the Strecker Museum, and it's now part of the research collection across the street over in the Mayborn Museum here at Baylor University. So it's still there, and people still come and look at it because every single specimen that we caught had a record accompanying it. There's a tag, a little cloth tag with a number on it. It's tied onto that specimen, and you can find our reference catalog and find that number, and it'll tell you, well, that's a Nematophorus sixlanianus. We caught it in San Saba County along the Colorado River. And we observed this, and the weather temperature and all the weather conditions, all the field observations were all part of the record of that specimen. So we learned the methodology, and it kind of has stuck with me because a lot of people call my drawings static, my compositional, especially my ones that are straight on and it's symmetrically aligned and everything, because that's the way I mount my insects. The specimens are all spread with the wings out, even on either side. The legs are mounted out, the antennas lined up, and that was what I was taught. So it just kind of sticks with me. There were influences artistically as I was growing up. I know there was a fellow named Weber that was a National Geographic painter. He did illustrations for some of their wildlife publications that they did. But there was also a regional guy, and you might know this guy, Charles Beckendorf. He was a local artist, lived in Fredericksburg. And he started out, my grandparents gave me, for several years when I was a kid growing up, they gave me a subscription to Texas Parks and Wildlife magazine. And Charles Beckendorf began his professional career as an artist by taking out small little ads in the publication of Texas Parks and Wildlife magazine. And I started seeing those and go, wow, I really like this guy's work. And I'd start copying them. The problem was he was using charcoal on a paper that had some tooth to it. And all I ever knew was a Central Freight Line pencil, because my dad would bring them home to me, because he got them from the freight salesman that would come around and call on them every once in a while. And just regular old bond paper, copy paper. And so it was always slick, smooth surface with graphite pencil. And I was trying to copy every little mark, innuendo of the charcoal on that toothy paper. I didn't even know what it was, but I copied every little fleck, and it would take me hours and hours to do that. But Charles Beckendorf, I saw what he was doing, and I really admired him. And when I started teaching here in Baylor, I think it was about my 4th year, I was taking roll for first day of class in my two-dimensional design class. And there was a young lady named Sophie Beckendorf, and I called her name Sophie Beckendorf. And she said, here. And I looked up at her and I go, do you know a fellow named Charles Beckendorf? And she goes, yeah, he's my granddaddy. I said, oh my gosh, I can't believe I have Charles Beckendorf's granddaughter in my class. But anyhow, she brought me that book that I just showed you. It's a signed limited edition book, and it means the world to me, because I was so in awe of Charles Beckendorf and his work. And he started off with those little bitty ads. It was just like a half or a quarter of a column in the magazine. And then as his career progressed, they got bigger. And he went to a half page. Then he was taking out full pages, and he started doing color. It was all just charcoal to begin with. And he started doing pen and ink work and hand coloring it. And his family still runs his gallery. He's passed away now, but his family still runs his gallery in Fredericksburg, on the outskirts of Fredericksburg. There, if you're ever that way, he's a Texas artist, does Texana stuff, wildlife mostly, but beautiful landscapes. And he was a big influence on me as a kid growing up. Anyhow, so I started off here in Baylor in the 70s, and I didn't finish my BFA degree until December of 1998. It only took me 20 years to get my BFA degree. I'm a slow learner, I guess. But actually, I had about a 17, 18-year hiatus in there, and got married and raised a family in between, from when I started to when I finished. Came back and finished up my degree. And then I did something really weird. I had a full ride scholarship to go. I'm going to be paid a stipend to teach a class for an MFA at the University of Dallas in printmaking. And I didn't go. And I could still kick myself for that, probably. But instead, I went to Fort Davis, Texas, and my brother and I bought a business, and we named it Insects International. It already existed, but for almost 9 years, my brother and I, we were professional bug collectors. And so all that upbringing as a kid, growing up and studying insects and knowing insects, and I picked it back up. Back in after my son was born, I thought, well, I wonder if he'll want to collect insects. So sure enough, we started collecting bugs again when my son was born. And that was 40 years ago. So I had a lot of experience collecting bugs. But for those from 2002 until 2009, I was a professional bug collector. We would go on expeditions all over Central and South America, even to Africa, collecting bugs, and we sold them to anybody that needed a bug. Texas A&M bought bugs from us. The Smithsonian Institute. Kids in high school that needed bugs for a biology project, they bought bugs from us. Anyhow, so I've always collected insects, and I've always drawn. And so I kind of have now merged my two main interests, driving forces in my life, two of them anyhow. And so I collect the bug, and I draw the bug, and then I write the story about it, the adventure, the people that I meet along the way, the memories, the pickles that you get into. It's pretty easy to do when you don't speak the language in South America. Tight spots and stuff, and I've had guns pulled on me. more than one occasion. I've been held up with machetes, and but it's been exciting, to say the least. And so all those stories are things that I associate with these insect specimens when I look at them. And so I've been doing a series of drawings now for about close to 6 years, I guess now. And I call them my insect narratives. I've got some here. I'm going to show you real quick, some of them. Most of the ones that Charles alluded to or referenced are at the gallery, but I've got some here that I happen to have in my drawer, my flat file drawer here in my office at Baylor. This is one of the earliest ones. It's probably maybe the second or third one that I did. And I was kind of experimenting a little bit with the size of the insect relative to the format of the paper. This is 22 by 30 inches. And this has a crazy story. This is an African moth, Saturnian moth that I caught in Cameroon. Not a Saturnian, a Sphinx moth, one of the hawk moths. And there were some incredible things there. And so I wanted to have plenty of space to be able to write the entire story. And so that's that one. And here's another one. This one's from French Guiana in South America. It's a big grasshopper, and had a lot of fun doing it. It is mostly colored pencil. I used colored pencil a lot in the earlier ones, but now I've kind of shifted, and I'll show you what I'm doing now for them, but especially on my smaller ones. But the techniques that I use on these bigger ones is a weird combination of colored pencil and pastels. Sometimes it's oil pastels and sometimes it's soft pastels. This one you see very symmetrically aligned, oriented, and again, it's one of those that I've had comments, well, that's pretty static, and dull, and boring for a composition, but that's kind of the way I'm oriented, dull and boring. But this is a katydid, came from Panama. Then I've started doing smaller formats. These are all 22 by 30s that I showed you. And then I scaled them down to an 8 by 10 size. This is a Sphinx moth that actually comes from the United States, but a very beautiful one. This one is a Saturnian moth that I caught in Guatemala on a more recent trip. This is another local moth. Some people call it the salt marsh caterpillar moth. Just a little arctiid moth, very small. And then most of you probably recognize this one. This is a Luna moth. And this last one I'll show you here just to save time. This one is call it great purple hair streak. It's actually blue, at least in my mind it is, but they call it the great purple hair streak. This is the female. And it's a local butterfly as well. I don't do just butterflies. I do grasshoppers, katydids, beetles, bees. I've done all kinds of bees. But anyhow, so what I wanted to do was show you my technique that I use on the majority of my work that I'm doing now, because I've scaled it down to the smaller formats. My assistant is realigning the camera here so you'll be able to see what I'm doing. This is the actual butterfly that I'm drawing here. This is a Morpho Menelaus is the name of it. That's the Latin name for it. It comes from Venezuela. This particular one does. They're scattered all through Central and South America. They only occur in the Western Hemisphere. And if I turn it a little bit, you can see the shimmering surface maybe. I hope. I don't know how it's translating visually on the camera here. But everybody loves a blue Morpho. And I've not done it really just because I tend to do, I'm a bit of a, I don't know what the word is I'm trying to find right now, purist. But yeah, I'm a purist. I'm not a bit of, I'm extremely a purist, but I'm a bit of a rebel, I guess is the word that I'm trying to say, because I don't like to do the most popular things. It took me forever before I finally did a monarch. Everybody's asking me, when are you going to do a monarch? I said, I don't do monarchs. I finally did a monarch, and by golly, it's the most popular one I have. I sell a bunch of them, the prints. Anyhow, so I've had people ask me about this one, and this is a blue Morpho from Venezuela. Now I've turned it at an angle here, and you can see on the drawing, but I reference the actual bug as I draw because I'm a purist and I want it to be accurate. I want my specimens to be so anatomically accurate that an entomologist can identify it. And in butterflies and moths in particular, you see, if you can see the veins here on my drawing, they're more prominent because I haven't added any color to them yet. But these veins are really important to identifying the families and even the genera of particular insects, because all these veins are labeled. If you look in entomology books and go to taxonomic keys where you're trying to identify something, they're going to reference the veins. So I put in all the veins, I put in all the marks that I can see, and that's not so important. What I want to show you is the particular technique that I've used on all of these smaller ones, all those small ones that I showed you a minute ago. Those are all 8x10s. And I scaled down the format because I began to realize I lose a lot of time in 5-minute snippets, 10-minute snippets here and there, not doing anything. I mean, it's totally lost time. So this particular size of format, which is going to be an 8x10 drawing, I can lay it in my lap on a piece of cardboard and I can work on it while I'm watching TV. Watching TV, the show's on, or maybe the football game's on, I'm watching the action, commercial break. There's 3 minutes right there, maybe 5 minutes. I can get a lot of stuff done with my pen as I'm sitting there watching TV. When I go to the doctor's office, go get allergy shots, wherever I go, I can carry this in and I can work on it while I'm waiting. I carry them in my truck. I don't do it at the stoplight, but sitting in a parking lot a lot of times, I'll take my wife to the grocery store. She's going to run in, go get something, and be back in 10 minutes later. I can get a lot of stuff done in 10 minutes time. So I do a lot of these, and I've made a bunch. I don't even know how many I've done. Probably, I'm going to guess 30 or 40 this particular size this past year. Just because of the smaller format, and I can carry it with me, and I'm using this pen. So what I do initially, this is a Pigma Micron pen, if you can see it here, and this is a .005. It used to be the smallest they made. Now they have a smaller one. I haven't found one yet, but I'm going to get it as soon as I find it. But it's got a very, very small nib, which you can see against the white paper here. It's extremely small. And this is what I use for stippling all the time, is the smallest one. And it makes a very tiny mark. Now, I won't have time during the rest of this session here to be able to finish this out, but I'm going to do this forewing, and I'm going to see if I can finish it out as though I was finishing out the entire drawing. Now, normally I don't do that. I do the entire bug in black and white. And what I do with this pen is I'm creating the value structure of the drawing, and I'm also creating the texture with the drawing, with the pen. So I do all of that with this first. And so you can see the darker bands on the outside edge of the butterfly here. It's just more marks. I don't know if any of you stipple or not. I've got a stipple drawing here. I'll show you. This one is a magnolia that I did. This one took forever. It's about 11 by 14 inches. And there's a lot of dots there. I didn't count them as I did them, but it takes a lot of dots to create, particularly the darker shadowy spots of the leaves and all. But I do a lot of stippling, and most of those are smaller. The biggest one I've done is the same size as those big drawings, 22 by 30 inches. And I recorded my time in each drawing session, and it took me 160 hours, which if you look at it in work weeks, that is a bunch of time. Now, it wasn't all one session. It wasn't 160 sessions. It was smaller sessions, but I'd add up my time every time I drew. And it was painstaking. My shoulders were screaming by the time I was through with it. But back to the bugs. So I'm going to finish this forewing here, and going to try to get this knocked out. And I'm not actually stippling. Stippling is dots. I'm using a very short hatch stroke here, And Professor Force is adjusting the camera to maybe see a little bit more of the detail as I work. But what I'm trying to do is create a sense. I'm not drawing every individual little scale. I can't draw small enough to begin with on this size format. I've done paintings where I painted every individual scale with a brush because they were hugely magnified, like 6 by 8 feet with just drawing a little tiny section of the bug, the moth wing. But anyhow, so I come back here and I start adding a little bit of the darker part, and I use a bigger stroke and I kind of overlap and just build up the darker value that I want, because this is all going to have pastel on it when I get done. So I'll be adding the color later. And that's what I wanted to show you here on this. Just do a little overlapping and crossing back and forth, different directions, to fill in the gaps, to fill up the white of the paper. Basically all I'm trying to do at this point. And get these the scales on the blue Morpho are unique. That shimmering comes from a structural difference between it and other butterflies and moths. If you look at a monarch, if you look real closely under a microscope at its scales, it has orange scales and black scales and the little white dots. Those are the colors of the scales. That's pigmented color. The blue Morpho, this butterfly that I'm drawing here, and the reason it changes colors when you shift it back and forth is because it doesn't have pigment. Basically, the scales are black, but each scale microscopically has a little pattern of ridges on it, little structural ridges that under an electron microscope, you have to have an electron microscope to even see them. They actually catch and refract the light, and they're turned in such a way that they absorb all the colors of the spectrum except the color that you see reflected back at you. Those intense blues, that shimmering blue. And when I was in the business of selling butterflies and moths and stuff and beetles, we actually had a contractor with the US government that ordered a bunch of these Morpho butterflies from us. And I asked him, when my curiosity gets the best of me, I open my mouth and ask stupid questions. But I asked him, I knew that he worked under government contract. And I said, what does the government have interest in these blue Morphos for? And he said, well, it's not the blue that we're after. We're after how they shift colors from different directions and stuff. He said, we're trying to figure out how that butterfly does that structurally so that we can come up with a paint to paint M1 Abrams battle tanks so that we don't have to repaint them when one goes from the forest green paint in Europe from the European theater into the deserts of Iraq or Afghanistan. It costs thousands and thousands of dollars to do a paint job on those tanks. And if they can come up with a paint that would be more reflective of the environment and actually shift colors, it may be more in the long run to paint it once, but then you wouldn't have to paint it again. And that's what they're actually studying butterflies to try to figure out how to make a paint that would actually reflect more of the environment around it. So, all right, so I've got this pretty well done now. So after the entire butterfly is done, I got the colors added by using, these are Pastel Pencils. And I've got several different brands. I think I've got 3 or 4 different brands right here. This is Faber-Castell Pitt Pastel, made in Germany. Here's Stabilo, Carbothello, and I don't even know how to pronounce them for sure. I've got one. This is from, that's Pitt Pastel again. I had one from Holland. There's some made from Holland. And then I've got these things here, the Derwent, made in England. So I've got several different brands of pastel, and I don't care which brand they are. I just want the color. I'm after the correct color. Now, normally, you don't get the exact color you want most of the time. And so you have to do some layering, and I'll layer 2 or 3 different colors to get the hue that I want. But And this Morpho is going to be kind of tough because it changes color from your direction. So if I turn it kind of like I have it and align it that way, it's a very dark blue now with lighter blues. So what I will do, and I'll come here and I'll pick up my lighter blues to begin with that I'm seeing reflected on the surface. And, oh, I forgot something. There's some wrinkles. So the actual veins of the wing are what support the membrane, which is how they fly. And actually, you can you probably have caught a butterfly or a moth at some time, and you held it in your fingers like this by the wings, and then you notice all this fuzz that comes off. That's the scales of the butterfly that are on the wing. That's what creates the color that you see on the surface of the butterfly. The actual membrane that the scales are attached to is kind of like cellophane. It's clear. You can actually, if I wanted to, I could take my thumb and finger and just rub this, where there'd be a clear spot in there. The membrane would be there, but all the scales, the color would be removed onto my fingers. But they're not totally flat. There's little undulations in the surface of between the cells. These are called cells in between the windows, in between the veins. And all these cells, they have little undulations. And I'm going to come back and create that first with my pen by coming up and just making some hatch marks. And so I'm just going to kind of look and get an example here of what I want to do. And I'm going to turn this and just make some hatch marks to kind of create the effect that there's some wrinkles in this membrane of this Morpho butterfly here. And then they kind of just play out. And there's more of them. There's some more down here along the outside edge where it's kind of folded a little bit. They do a little dip. Sometimes I may have 2 or 3 little dips in them. I'm just creating a sense of that with my pen as part of the value structure that I want for it. I don't have to make it real hard and heavy, just a slightly darker part than the rest of the membrane, all the scales that you've done. Make it a little bit darker down there maybe, so that the actual surface doesn't look like it's just totally flat. If it's all the same value, it looks very flat. And taper that off. Okay, so I've got that done now, pretty much like I want it. All right, so now that I have to go to my colors. And this is going to be hard because like I said, it shifts so much, and you're seeing an entirely different, the angle of the camera is giving you an entirely different color that I'm seeing. But I'm going to put it similar to where it's turned at an angle to me from my point of view. And I start with the lighter colors. If you're painting, a lot of times, if you want texture on top of it, you'll start with the darker colors and then come back with the lighter values on top. And you can make little hairs and stuff with a lighter value on top of a dark background. But for this purpose, I like to start with the lighter values and then work into my darker values. So I'm going to choose as close as I can possibly get to the lighter blues that I'm seeing. And I really don't have the blue that I need. There's just nothing pigment-wise that's going to match it. But I'm going to get as close as I can to begin with. I'm going to go ahead and lay in some of this. This is a light blue. I'm just going to come in. Now, when you start adding color, you pretty much, and it's just roughly put in, okay? I'm kind of highlighting, creating a sense of highlight on those ridges there that I created with the pen with the hatch marks just now. And I'm going to come back and fill in gaps with darker values. but I want the lightest value first. And I just kind of block it in. It's very rough looking, not real precise even. Doesn't have to be. So I've got that, and then I come back with the darker value. I'm going to add this. This is actually closer, a little bit closer to the color I need, but I need some of that lighter value too. I'll come back and work it in properly. I use pastels, but I do not consider myself a pastel artist. I am in awe of somebody that really knows what they're doing with soft pastels. I'm scared of them, to be honest with you. I'm afraid I'll mess it up so bad. I'd be ashamed to show it to anybody when I got done, so I just don't do it to begin with. So what I'm trying to do is create a sense of the different shimmering blues that you see here without having a metallic-y shimmering color to do it with, to actually do it with. So it's not the easiest thing in the world sometimes. And then there's some even darker colors. I'm going to come back here in a minute. I'm going to add some darker colors to that even. Try to match up. There's even some purple. I'm seeing some really deep violets. This violet is almost exactly the same purple that I'm seeing from where I'm at. I mean, just right on it. But I'm going to put in some darker blues first, down in the valleys of those little creases I was trying to create. I tell you what, I've done all the talking, and if y'all want to ask me a question as I'm doing this, Carol, would you mind unmuting everybody so that maybe just interject, just jump in there and ask me if I say, why on earth are you doing that? You're destroying your drawing or whatever, if you want to.
Okay. I can't unmute people, but I can send them requests to unmute themselves.
Okay. Or maybe they can send you a question through the app there.
Well, Karen Bigley did make a comment. She said that her father-in-law had a PhD in entomology from Texas A&M. So
cool.
I'm sorry.
I
took entomology. I took entomology when I was at A&M and had to collect the bugs.
Oh yeah. Most high schools don't do that anymore. They don't make them.
Well, that was a college course.
Yeah.
Up at A&M.
Well, see, I never took an entomology course, and I feel like I got shortchanged because I never had to take it. I never got to do a bug collection.
Oh, you would have loved it. You would have loved it. Can you find those pastels in a shimmer?
There are some. I don't know in a soft pastel. Of course, in colored pencil, you can find metallic-y colors.
I just asked the question because I know you can get it in watercolor. I have watercolor shimmers.
Right.
If you could get it in pastels, then that might help you with the shimmer.
Yeah, I've tried some experimentation with colored pencils that have that, and it really doesn't create quite the same effect. It's just, this is such a hard thing to try to, that shimmering blue, and with it changing constantly, it's just
right.
It's pretty daunting, actually. Try to replicate that.
So do you always draw perfect specimens, or do you have some that are missing pieces?
No, I do. I've got a lot of them that have, and I draw with the chunks out of them. If it's missing, a lot of them will have on the hind wing, there'll be a little U-shaped kind of, and what that is, I finally discovered what it was. So common and it was so uniformly shaped. There had to be an explanation for it, and what it is, it's bird beaks, where a bird tried to grab it to eat it, and it just cut out like a cookie cutter. Like a hole punch, just cut out the shape of the beak right there. it's pretty neat. Okay, so once I get most of my color down, like this, in the lighter colors, then I go to my stump. And I've just got, these are tornillons, I call them, stumps, just rolled up piece of paper. Sometimes I made my own. But as you can see, it's pretty roughed in, and I pretty much have obliterated most of the ink drawing underneath. I'm gonna add some of that purple in here because I want to get that too, especially coming out of the darker area on the outside edge. And I haven't added anything on this outside edge yet. I'll come back and get that here in a minute.
What kind of paper do you use?
Okay, the paper, that's a good question. I have found out the best paper for this particular technique for me that I like is Fabriano Artistico watercolor hot press paper. It is 320 grams per square meter. So it's a real heavyweight. This is, I mean, it's really thick. It comes with 2 decals, and I cut it down. Actually, I score the paper and then I tear it. Oh, I just got loose pastel all over my drawing. Next, clean that up real quick. Okay, so now I come back in with my stump, and I begin to work it in. And again, I start with the lighter areas, and I just work it in, usually kind of a little short circular motion. I'm going to hit all the lighter areas first. Begin to stump that in.
I have a Zoom meeting right now.
Add some more color in there. You can see how the pastel, basically, it's so opaque. The soft pastels, they obliterate the ink drawing underneath, but that's okay. It's coming back. I basically draw the insect twice, one on top of the other. I do it with the pen and ink for the value scale and the value structure and the texture, and then I do it again with the pastels to add the color. Veins, I'll come back in and actually follow the vein to really, what I'm actually trying to do is stain the paper in between the dots, the marks of the pen. And then I'm going to resurrect the ink drawing here in a minute. Try to anyway, I hope.
I guess you put some kind of surface fixative on it when you finish, or?
Yes, when I finish it, I sure do, Charles. I just use a spray fixative.
Okay.
Some people use, I can't remember. I almost said Everclear. I know that's not right. It's crystal clear. Yeah. Yeah. It's.
And do you do a matte or semi-gloss or satin?
I use matte.
Matte.
Yeah, I use matte. I sure do. Okay, so there's that. Now then, to get the, we're almost out of time. I'm gonna blow this off real quick. All right, so I would come back in now and do the entire outside edge in the darker browns and blacks. It's actually a very, very dark charcoal brown, but I would probably add a little bit of black to it. But then I come back with a kneaded rubber eraser. If you don't have these, you need to get them. This, I mean, if you're going to do this kind of work, these things are magic. Now I have this eraser and I have a regular eraser. This is called a Vanish. This is the private label of the Moo erasers that you can find in Hobby Lobby. You get two in a pack for about $3. These are from Jerry's Artorama. It's the brand. They have it made. It's made at the same factory and everything. Made in Korea. It's the exact same thing, but they're cheaper. So I get them from Jerry's Artorama. And then the other thing that I use sometimes is little mono zero elastomers made by Tombow. That is a fine eraser that you can come back. I'll hit the highlights on these veins a lot of times and do that to raise them back up a little bit, just to make them a little bit, show up a little better structurally. But I'm going to come back in now and I'd just shave. You just kind of shave with, shave the pastel back off. And you create highlights by more pressure in some areas, but you want to, I'm re-exposing all that pen and ink work that I did to begin with. And it leaves the sense of the texture of the scales and all on it. And I can come back, and if I want to make that enhance those, the undulations a little bit more in the wing, I can do that with the eraser with a little bit more pressure. The reason I love these, if I need a little dot, I can pinch down a little dot and I can come in here and erase a little spot. But these things are just great. I use them all the time for my work anyway. So I think we're getting pretty close to being done with our time. Does anybody have a question for me or?
Yeah, I have a question about, you write the story in the background, right?
Yeah. Uh-huh. I do. Yes.
How do you do that? And get it a straight line. Do you have lines that you erase?
Charles, is that you?
Yeah.
You know what? It used to bother me. That is the most common question I get on this body of work. Absolutely. And at first, it offended me almost. I would be taking it, and I was in my mind, somebody would ask me that. I'm going, what about the bug that I just spent 40 hours on? And but the writing, and I finally figured it out. The writing is something that everybody can relate to. Because everybody writes, and to be able to write in a straight line over some of those expanses of 30 inches across, and I cheat like any good artist does. I have so like I said, this is going to be an 8x10, and I have it's not a ruler, but I cut strips of mats and I number them and I line them up, and so I'm numbered inches all the way down on either side. Then I take another piece and I tape them in place. And then I take another piece of mat board and tape it across this way, and I'll write, and then I'll move it down, then I'll write and just move it down like that. So that keeps me straight. Now, the second most common question about the writing was, how do I always end up down here in the lower right-hand corner? Because I start up here, and people have asked me, do you write it all out ahead of time so you know how much you've got to write? I go, no, I don't. I just start writing. Whatever the story is, however I remember it. And then when I start getting down here toward this end, and I need to finish up down here, I'm somewhere along up here, I think, okay, I've got that much space left to fill. How much do I have left? I've got to wrap it up, or do I need to stretch it? I may have to stretch it. So I may have to chase a rabbit or two between here and there to get it to there. But so far, I've been lucky enough, I've always ended up where I needed to, down in the lower right-hand corner.
Yeah. Well, it's fascinating to read that. It takes a while to read it, but the story behind it is fascinating too.
Well, the first time I showed these was at the Art Center of Waco.
Yeah.
They invited me to. Matter of fact, the director of the art center in Waco, she was a student of mine in two-dimensional design. She had graduated from here. And she knew I had all these drawings, and she called me up and said, would I be interested in showing? I said, sure. And it's the first time I ever showed them in public. It was actually my first public show of my artwork anywhere, of any of my artwork. So I had all these things framed up, and I had 3 of them that were 3 foot by 5 feet at the time. And I didn't have, and most of them were 22 by 30s. I didn't have any 8 by 10s at all then. And I stood back and watched people in front of my artwork, Charles, stand there for 15, 20, 30 minutes reading every single word that I wrote.
Yeah.
And my thought was, wow, my artwork's never had that kind of impact on people before. You know, for any artist, for someone to stand in front of your work and to give you a solid minute of actually looking hard, or
usually
5 minutes, you know, it was extraordinary. I had one lady, I was watching her, she stood there and watched, she read the whole thing. It was one of the big ones, the 3 foot by 5 feet one.
Yeah.
She came over and found me. She goes, Greg, I just read your drawing over there and it gave me goosebumps. And so the story is, it's a big deal for my drawings. I even did one on a hawk that I did, a red-tailed hawk. So I don't do just bugs. I used to fancy myself as a wildlife artist, and insects are officially classified as wildlife, but they're not what most people think of traditionally. And so I'll show you a couple of things that I've done real quick. And then
there was one down at Cultivate 712 that's like, is it like 5 by 8 feet or something?
Yeah, that one is. It's 4 feet by 8 feet.
4 feet by 8 feet.
It has the 4 beetles on it. And that one was specifically that size because of the story that goes along with those beetles. I knew it was going to take a lot of physical space to write the entire story. So I needed to make it big enough. And that story, as a matter of fact, Charles, I don't know if you've read it. It does take a while. I've actually got a transcript of it now, so I'm printed out and you can actually read it without having to stand there.
Yeah.
But it's got 5 columns of text that are, you know, almost 4 feet long. And that story, I wanted to tell it so bad, but I knew that I was going to have the physical space. So I made it big because I needed the physical space, but I also made it big because of the story itself, the importance of the story itself. And I don't have time to tell you the story and everything now, but someday maybe you'll catch up to it. But it's so, you saw how I got so emotional a while ago when I first started talking. I mean, that was, I just get overwhelmed with emotion sometimes thinking about things. And those beetles, as I was working on those beetles, trying to work out the detail of how I'm going to do these, and I did them all together, brought them all up together. You know, I didn't draw one and do the other. I did them all. There's 4 of them. I would get so overwhelmed thinking about the story. I finally had to put that thing away. I rolled it up, and I put it in the closet for almost, over a year. And then I found I got to do that thing. And so that summer between semesters here at Baylor, I pulled it out and started working on it. I finished the beetles. And then it was like a 5-day enduro run, a marathon. When I started writing it, I didn't quit until I finished it 5 days later. And I'm talking like 10, 12-hour sessions, not an hour here and an hour there. When I started writing it, I did it. I got it. I pushed through, and my shoulders were screaming by the time I threw it down. But anyway, yeah, that one, I don't know if I'll ever do another one quite that large. But who knows? Maybe. So here's a bird, bald eagle. This is a bald eagle that lives at the Cameron Park Zoo. It's done exactly with the same technique that I showed you here. Color is added with the pastels. This one here was a pure stipple drawing of a little fishing lure. I did a whole series of these, about 26 or 27 of them, old antique fishing lures. And it's all stippled with that same pen, that Micron 005. I stipple it, and then I added the color with the pastels. Now, this is one that you might have seen. You said something about it posted on Instagram.
Yeah.
This is one that I did just for grins. This is all charcoal. But
that's cool.
Longhorn steer. And then here's another, and it's on that same paper. This is a Roadrunner that I did. It's on a different paper that I don't like because it's too soft. Anyhow, So I do other things besides bugs, but mostly I do bugs.
Okay.
Anyhow, anybody have any questions for me or any other comments you'd like me to address?
No, I think it's fascinating to really get into something like that. I have a few times, but not with the same intensity that you have.
Yeah. Well, I've got plenty of bugs now that I haven't drawn that I could continue in this particular series, this body of work, the insect narratives. I've got enough bugs to do me the rest of my life.
Oh, really? You said a bunch of your bugs are at A&M?
Yes. We've donated a lot, but we also sold them a lot. There in the heat building, there's a big display that has a couple of hundred of big showy bugs and stuff from all over the world that we collected.
Okay. Well, I'm going to go take a look at that.
Yeah, you should. If you're ever in New Orleans, down along the river walk at the Audubon Museum, they have a huge display in there that's made up of insects. All those insects came from me.
Okay. Wow.
And at Key West, there's a butterfly conservatory. It's called the Key West Nature Preserve and Butterfly Conservatory. It's a big greenhouse, hurricane-proof greenhouse thing that's got a tropical forest inside with butterflies flying around and colorful finches and stuff. But the guy sells these huge displays, a lot of using morphos, these shimmering blue ones. He does these big sprays. They're all in these acrylic cases that you can buy for $3,000 or $5,000. And
Wow.
I used to sell all of his specimens when I was in business.
Okay, cool. Well, we really appreciate this. It's been totally fascinating for me. We ended up with a dozen or more people on here, and we'll get a dozen or more to see it as time goes by over the next month, and we really appreciate it. Thanks very much.
I appreciate it.
I just want to say I really enjoyed this, and I just want to say that you're very, very talented, and it's beautiful work. And I'm speechless because it's just beautiful.
Well, coming from a fellow artist, that means a lot to me. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank
I'll
you.
send you an email in a little bit.
Okay. All right.
So I get your
Thanks, Greg.
Y'all stay safe.
Greg.